red light go on. Well, Baba, I don't think he was pretending this time. You know, he wasn't play acting. He really looked absolutely flabbergasted. So I was flabbergasted too. And so to try to cover up, I said, no, you know, actually, Baba, I've been thinking recently that I've got to go back and reread your discourses, because I haven't touched them for about 15 years. And we've got a strange class of people knocking on the door in San Francisco, call them the hippies. And they seem to be very, very prone to the discourses that are in the decimal tradition. And I just begin to have a suspicion that this is going to be, especially for young people, their Bible for daily life. Baba looks interested in that, very interesting. Yes. Just as if I'm telling the Avatar news from the editor's main office.
Baba says, well, that'll be interesting. So I get home and I get out the old decimal tradition and start rereading it. This was an experience. When I first read them, when I first knew about Baba, you know, Merchant Martin had put us under him. And I thought they were wonderful, absolutely unique. I was not inspired by them. And I thought, well, this part it seems to apply to my life, that part not particularly. But when I went back 15 years later, I just have to say every sentence, I knew it from my own experience what was going on. And I was having experiences where what the discourses pointed out were absolutely embarrassing. It was a revelation that really woke me up, you know, to the layers and layers of meaning and inspiration and so I said, Bob, I'm reading them again, and they are marvelous, but I do know one thing, and that is Deschner is a wonderful scholar. He is very organized, he's very well educated. His grammar is faultless, and his spelling almost never any mistakes in it. There's one thing though, and that is I've noticed the end of that well-educated Indians who speak good English have something that I call Indian sentence structure. And it is not the same sentence structure as is used in England and in America. And so I sort of suddenly come to a halt and sort of have to retranscribe a sentence into a slightly different order to be sure that I get the sense of what is being written. This does flow up into my attempt that you could get one of your good English-speaking scholars to re-edit the sentence structure. You think what happens? You do it! That was the first time he pulled that one on me. So, I spent, I suppose, another year, 2 years, it was quite a while, on these. Now we get to, I think, the most important thing is what we were saying to each other. And I think that the last 6, 8 months had gone by. He said, well, how is the editing of the discourses? And I said, fine. The stories that are accurate. We've got to get them both because they're monumental in their importance. The first time that when I had something to say back to Baba, I said, Baba, you know, I've just been re-editing the discourses on meditation, and I've suddenly realized that you have spent more discourses on meditation than you have even on samskaras. And certainly samskaras are, to me, the most important thing that you have given us in this lifetime in esoteric theory. Yeah. They're fundamental. And I said, and Baba, I just have to point out to you that as soon as you took the Sufis under your guidance, you immediately sent a message of instructions to Mercia de Martin, which she allowed me to read, asking her to stop all meditation and concentration exercises. And so I've never had one. And here now, I find that you get more on meditation even than samskaras. And I didn't want to sound plaintive, but maybe I did. And I said, but Baba, how come? In that case, you've never given me a meditation. And I was prepared to have stuck my foot in the mud puddle on this occasion. But no, Baba leans back and smiles and says, good question, Don. He did that when I asked him about St. Francis also. So I knew I could get something on this one. So I was optimistic. He said, I want you to understand, Don, that during the time of the manifestation of the avatar, the gate to the path of truth, the gate to the path of love to the truth is fully open. And the path of love is the greatest of all paths to truth. During the time of the manifestation of the avatar, and for some time afterwards, and he did not specify how many years, I don't know how many times I've read different authoritative people say this length of time is that length of time and so on. Baba did not say. I never heard Baba say a figure to this. During the time and for some time after, the gateway will be fully open. But then it will gradually narrow and eventually become accessible only to the great ones on the path, like St. Francis, people of that sort of caliber. And he said, then the path of love will be relatively inaccessible, and I must prepare the future for my devotees during this period when the second most efficient path is that of meditation. And because I will not be back for some hundreds of years, I must prepare for my devotees during that time. This is why I have given out so many discourses on meditation. So, see what he said. Yeah. And I tried telling the Mandali this story a couple of times because I thought, my gosh, this is, Baba has just said he's already manifested. They're all waiting around for him to manifest and hallelujah being shouted to the heavens and so on. But, I really got set in my position when I tried to bring this to anybody's attention. So I warn you that this is a very, very delicate subject that we're dealing with. But Baba said that so terribly clearly. So that was the first, say, just incredible nugget that came up in relation to the editing of the discourses. Then a few months later, as I was coming through, Baba was saying again, well, how are you coming? And this time he added the element, have you started talking with a publisher about a contract for publishing? And I said, well, no, Baba, I haven't yet, but I think we've identified an extremely good printer in Tokyo, because I was doing a lot of business work in Tokyo at the time, and gotten to know some of the people in the publishing business. So I think that I should probably start doing some contract negotiations. And then I added on to that, but I don't know what good this is all going to do. Now, you realize what I said to Baba. I say, Baba, you're a nitwit, I'm a nitwit. This is a no-go project. It's never going to be of any value. I don't know why we put all this time and thought and energy. I don't know why you egged me into doing it in the first place. All of this, is implicit in my, I don't know what good it's all going to do. I couldn't believe what I had said. Just incredible, Jack, how do you suppose one can possibly do things like that, isn't it? Right under the avatar's nose, looking him in the eye. That's Jack's description. This was it didn't feel like inspiration to me. It felt like infernal nitwittism. So, at any rate, when I said I don't know what good this is all going to do, Baba leans back in his chair and he looks surprised. And he says, Don, what do you mean by that? I think he was genuinely surprised. I think even the avatar, on occasion, can be taken by surprise. I think there's room for that much uncreativity in creation. And so I knew I was in for it, and because Baba had made so much a point of absolute honesty, which we'll get into maybe tomorrow, that I knew I just had to level with him. Now, look, I'm not trying to look anybody in the eye, but I've had some very, very deep conversations with an awful lot of my mystic friends and quite a few Baba lovers. And part of that conversation on many occasions has been so disconcerting to me that I would get almost sick at heart. So I knew I had to level with Baba. And I said, Baba, in recent years, there has been increasingly the feeling on the part of many sincere seekers of the truth that words, philosophy, logic are not only a help on the spiritual path, but can actually be a barrier to progress, and therefore they should be discarded. Baba is very thoughtful about this, takes it in, and really, I have to wait a minute, Jack, because I can't interrupt this one. This was the only time that I was around Baba when I saw him suddenly. His facial features changed. His cheeks went sunken. He looked almost gray complected. He looked old and tired and worn out. And then he said to me, and Don, do they say this about my words? Well, I had to tell him. Several of the people whom I love most, I would say some of the most devout, deeply, sincerely loving people of Baba, at least some of them have been people who feel very deeply on this subject and have said to me, Don, I have never even read one word in their Babas. In other words, their convictions were that deep. And so I said just about that to him, but I underlined the fact that these were really people who loved him deeply, and it was sincere, and it was profound, and it was real. And so Baba then turned away from me, looked Harry square in the eye, and looked at me, and they went into a conversation, Harry speaking Gujarati and Baba with his gestures. Now, this had never happened to me before. If they went into a private conversation, it was always Irish and English, so I could understand one side of the conversation and keep track. But this was completely hidden from me. So this went on, I think, easily for 10 minutes. It seemed like a century. Finally, at the end of it, Baba sort of almost tiredly, sadly, turns back and starts looking at me. And Irish then begins to explain. So Baba has tried to explain something very important to me, and because the concept is not one with which I am familiar, I've had trouble getting the exact words for Baba to be completely satisfied. But as best as I can get what he is saying to me, he is saying that when he gives out his words in the manner which has been described to you, that God speaks was given out, for instance. In these cases, for his devotees and for public consumption, he does something like attaching an atom bomb, something like an atom bomb of spiritual energy to each word. And he wants you to know that if a devotee works with those words, then even if he does not understand intellectually 2 words of what he has read, he will still absorb automatically a quantity of that attached spiritual energy which will be invaluable to him in the spiritual ongoing. Well, this was an incredible statement, and this is what we're talking about today and tomorrow, the importance of that statement, and why I know inside of myself we're living now in the time of Baba's words. So that sank in for a moment. Baba looked at me to see if I understood it, and then he began gesturing to Arish again. And so I waited for a few moments, and then as Arish said these words, "And Baba wants you to know," Baba then raised his hand and pointed his finger at me again, "that it is your responsibility, Don, to tell my devotees what I have explained to you today." That's a pretty big order, and you don't take it lightly. So this is really, let's say, the big basis of why I felt, let's say, we just had to sit down and I tried to explain as best as possible to you everything that I know of the history of Baba's very carefully laid out and fabricated words to us, and why they are important, because they are, and why it is so desperately important that we preserve their integrity. That is not something that belongs to 2 or 3 people, the police, but it belongs to everybody who loves Baba and is following Baba to reality. Yes.
Do you think that Baba set all this up as a challenge to us?
I would simply say it's not just a challenge, but it is a simple mapping of the truth of a terribly important manner of going about the important thing to the human being, that is to recognize again his identity with God. This is important. This is, to me, the important mechanics and driving energy, the great resource open to anybody, even a person who's not intellectually inclined at all. I have known a number of people, let's say with that story, just who have said again and again, I can't make sense or head or tails of God Speaks, it's too much for me. Then go back and just drill it and just keep doing it. One of the most beautiful things I ever read is from the wife of one of our old London group members, and she was in it also until a nervous deterioration disease gradually bedrode her somewhere or another. Bedrode her. Okay, thank you, Lou Barron. See how convenient a pill it is. She was simply saying, you know, Don, Keith has been telling me so much about your push on Baba's words and working with him, even if you don't seem to be getting anywhere with it. And she said, I love my husband and I trust you. And certainly Baba had to say something terribly important. So I started making a point of, even though I'm bedridden, getting together some way in a group to work on God Speaks. And for some reason or another, I just couldn't do it. I didn't feel anything about it. It didn't get anywhere for me. And then I tried it with 2 or 3 close friends. And again, even with those people that I loved and had so much empathy for, I still didn't get anywhere. And she said, then one day I was thinking to myself, well, I'm a person who has a lot of tactile sense in my life. Doing things with my hands has particular meaning and relationship to me, to my life, to my progress. So I just suddenly had the idea, what if I pick a paragraph each day and I write out with my hands that paragraph? And she said, I started that out.
Writing out God Speaks.
Writing out God Speaks, paragraph by paragraph each day. And she said, one day, totally unexpectedly, absolutely no logic to it, all of a sudden, all of the crazy things in my life all fitted into a pattern, and I understood things that I have never understood before. And it was so extraordinary experience and so meaningful. But then I reread the paragraph that I had just written, and there was nothing in that paragraph that said anything at all about the things that had gotten settled in my life. There was no logical connection between them. And she says, every time now that life gets topsy-turvy, I go back and I rewrite that paragraph. And again, things fit into place. Anyway, this was just one of some of the most beautiful emails and letters and phone calls I've ever had in my life, who took Baba's statement for real, work with it, and even if it makes no sense, you'll absorb a part of it, which will be of tremendous importance in your own spiritual ongoing. So this is to give a little bit of faith. Jack, what do you add?
I just want to actually repeat something you said. You were telling Baba how people respond to words, and in turn you said, what do they say about my work?
Yeah. Yeah. I said to Baba, there are many people, even people who love you deeply and sincerely, who will say, I have never read a single word that even Baba has written. And then was when he turned to Erich, and they talked together. Oh, well, in the first part, before he said, is that what they say about my words, I'd explained that many people nowadays, sincerely devoted to the spiritual path, feel that logic, intellect, reason are not only not important for achieving spiritual progress, but are actually a barrier to progress, a positive barrier. And then he said, do they say that about my words? And then I said, yes, Baba, even some of the most devout lovers of you personally, and I know their depth and sincerity of their love, even they say, I have never read a word that Baba has written.
Doesn't it say in Godspeed from Baba that he has written to refresh, to satisfy the intellect of man?
Do you know who wrote that? Erich.
Which is a very different definition.
But this is part of the 10 chapters that Baba definitely says, this is me. And I've never known Baba to correct Erich. Not because Erich does so many things that need correction. But you know, if you love Baba, if you love him deeply, he gives you tremendous latitude. And I think that's what he did with Ivy Deuce with the supplement. Even more latitude than he would give Erich. Not because he loved her more, but because there were valuable things in the supplement to be preserved. And obviously, he wanted them preserved. But he also wanted to get a crack in back at Ghani for having been such a lousy companion as not to do a better job on note-taking and follow through. Baba can be a disciplinarian. Sometimes he can be a tough disciplinarian, but sometimes he can be a terribly soft disciplinarian. But you still know you did wrong. Well, now we've got some of the most important stories spread out. Are we getting to the bottom of page one?
We're doing great.
Yeah, my pillar is passing out compliments, you see. So now we're getting down here into Roman numeral number 2. I didn't say anything about later assignments from the trust because after Baba dropped his body, then I carried on. Baba decided during his incorporation in his physical body that obviously I was over in Europe, and he says, well, what do they do for Baba's writings here? And I say, well, England, no trouble, of course, but I notice everywhere in Europe the same sort of hippie people are springing up with this deep driving need to find truth. They're not just drug addicts. They're not just people who are crazy because they don't like the way their parents have been living or not living. There's a deep driving sincerity. I wasn't telling Bob anything new. He knows all about this. So so he said, well, what should we do? And so I said, well, Barbara, I suppose they ought to be translated in principal European languages. He said, that's a good idea. You see, Stephen's fattening himself up to the kill again. And so we talk about this language and that language, what languages, you know, you can't put it in 15, 20 languages, it's too much. So finally we settled on French, German, and Spanish. And I said, well, that's pretty easy, Barbara, because start out with the discourses, because that's the Bible for these kids. Yes, that's fine. Yeah. And you've got wonderful lovers in Germany and France and Spain, and they'll do it. You do it! You know, again, I never learned. I'm a naive guy. And so, but then I had a point, and I said, Baba, I've done a lot of work. Shall I tell you a little story about my French petroleum friend? Yeah. You got time for this? Well, since we're steaming ahead so fast now, we'll just take the time for it. Once when I got to visit Baba, he said, well, where do you come from this time? And I said, well, Paris, Baba. Oh, yes, Paris. Nice living there, isn't it? So on. So I said, yes, last evening I was with a wonderful family of petroleum friends. We had dinner together. And I said, actually, we carried on the conversation in the family almost entirely in French. And I felt rather proud of myself. And he said, oh, that's good. And how did you do that? And I said, I don't know why, Baba. I've been working on French television news reports. I've been going to French motion pictures. I've even been buying Agatha Christie translated into French in order to improve my... You know, if you really want to get driven to work on a language, get a good mystery story, you know. Boy, you just go down through the paragraphs like lightning and you learn a lot despite yourself. And so after I said this to him, I said, but you know, Baba, when I think of it, I don't know why I do this, because they all speak better English than I speak their languages. And so Baba waggles his finger at me and says, you will know one day, Don. So here we are. I told him I've been working hard there with my German and French and Spanish in order to talk the languages to the customers. And so what does he select? French, German, and Spanish to translate. And I say, I don't know how to translate them, Baba. I can't possibly do that. And say, Baba does not mean that you should do the work of translating, but you supervise them. And you know this is true? This is absolutely true. I have a better esoteric knowledge in these three languages than most esoteric translators in those languages in their own native tongue. So I have to go through again and again the translations in these three languages and pointing out, well, this isn't exactly what Baba was driving at and meaning in this particular part. So I found out. But you know what that has done? You can't guess it. It has meant that I have worked with Baba's words probably more than any other human being who's ever lived, except maybe Irish. And so I suddenly, when I began waking up 2-3 years ago, I realized, well, things have really changed an awful lot inside of myself. And I suddenly thought, I'm sorry. I was a guinea pig. I was a chief guinea pig. And Baba used all of this translation business, because I would have to go over these translations word by word, comparing to the English language. And when you're comparing the subtleties of translation, you really work. You really concentrate. So this was, I always say to people, if you ever have the good luck to translate Baba's words into a foreign language, you have one of the greatest gifts that Baba can possibly give you, the real gift of grace. So, yeah, please.
The publication of God Speaks in German, as far as I know, marks the end of the assignment that Baba gave you.
Yeah, his chief works into French, German, and Spanish.
And that just came out.
So I can pop off the mortal coil now.
But that's amazing, Don.
It is. It is. It's taken decades. And you know what one of the chief time consumers is to identify a really good esoteric publisher in a language. Then find out a personal approach to get to know him personally. Because if you're trying to sell God Speaks or the Discourses particularly, you know, even a fine esoteric editor will almost immediately say, this is way beyond what the average esoteric seeker is able to understand in our country. So it's a tough one. And so finally, you have to form a personal bridge over to an individual to really capture his interest. And that takes time. We were looking for years to find somebody in Spain. I knew a number of the publishers, but I didn't know their quality. And believe this or not, I went on loan in the latter part of my professional career to the Spanish government. And my direct boss was for quite a good many years the Secretary of Energy for all of Spain. Designed all of the atomic power projects, hydroelectric dams, and so on. Most of the petrochemical plants of the country. Terrific individual. He was the top honor student of all of the universities of Spain the year that he graduated. In addition to which, he is one of the most marvelous human beings and creative writers I've ever run into in all of my life. A real genius and a terrific human being. So he and his family all took a great interest in Mayor Baba. And two of his daughters went over the edition of the Discourses in Spanish, word by word, working on the material. You know, that's a great compliment coming from a family like that. It becomes a family project. So several years after I left and retired, he said, well, where are you getting with putting God Speaks in Spanish? And I said, well, Luis, I just haven't gotten anywhere. I've done a lot of research work. I've made a number of calls on various different publishing firms, and I just cannot satisfy myself that a particular one is the right one to concentrate on. I can't get that sense, and they don't get enough interested in Mayor Baba or me to pursue it themselves. And so he said, why don't you tell me about this? Now, can you imagine a man in his position saying, well, why didn't you tell me that you couldn't get a publisher interested in God Speaks? You know, this is an interesting commentary on a great industrial figure. The humanity of him. Why didn't you tell me about this? And I said, Louise, you helped so much on the Discourses and all your family got involved. I just didn't have the heart to bother you again. And he said, Don, what is friendship about? So I said, well, my apologies, Louise. So he said, well, the person we're going to get on the trail of this is currently the visiting professor in whatever the subject was at Cambridge University. He had known him as a professor in Spain. So he gets out and writes a personal letter to this guy up in Cambridge University, who's a top authority in his field and sought after all of the time. Within a week, I had a long, personal, handwritten message from him saying I thought carefully about the problem that Louise has explained to me, and my recommendation is these three publishers. Gave me the name, key people, and said, I'm going to write a personal letter of introduction for you to each of these, which he handwrit in turn. They came to me the following week, and the top one, who is, I find, easily the top one, read the English God Speaks and said, nothing like this has been written for 5,000 years. So the family fell in love with God Speaks, but they're also good commercial people. They know what it takes in order to make a successful venture out of something. So he said, we're fascinated by it. We find that all of our best college, university contacts and writing contacts who are really good in the philosophical field, they all know Meher Baba. And they all say the same thing. He is legitimate. He is it. But the second thing is that he is almost unknown to the general public in Spain. So we've got to work out a program by which we can introduce Meher Baba in an easier to understand manner than God Speaks will do it. And he said, we have a series of basic philosophy series, and what we can do is put out a smaller book about Meher Baba, his life, and the basic principles of his philosophy. You know what he did? He said, and you will do it for us.
Oh, Baba taught him that.
Do you suppose that he inherited a gene from Baba? Had to be the similar genetic structure. And so, of course, I said, no, I can't possibly do it. Do we have time for that story? No. Little Bear says no. So, at any rate, I ducked it, and then I finally got saddled with it, and then I wrote that one, which the English title is Meher Baba, the Awakener of the Age. And it did well in Spain, translated into Spanish. It's even done fairly well in English. So then at the end of the year, they said, well, based on that, we feel that we can go ahead. So then they put out the Spanish edition of it, and the German, as Little Bear says, is the last one. Now, I think Little Bear has got something on his mind that he wants to be sure that we...
Roman numeral 2.
Well, here we are.
This is
Resources
a unique
available.
opportunity.
Yeah, unique. Okay, let's be unique then. You want to do Roman numeral number 2?
No.
Well, if you're looking at your outline, it says resources available after Bob is dropping the body. Resources. We're talking about words of Meher Baba, whether or not he gave them in the particular manner that he described he had given God Speaks, or whether they were, let's say, in a less formalized giving out. Because I'm sure all of you are pretty well familiar that not terribly long after Baba had dropped the body, then they began turning up this thing that had never been looked at before, was buried in a pile of papers there, or was in a satchel and had gotten misplaced, and so on. So these things then began coming up. Now, what would you say about, and there's some very interesting things, for instance, in God's Hands was one of those. There's that exciting manuscript. But what does that say to you about its importance as far as Baba's word is concerned? His word is going to, let's say, help carry us on to God. Not the only resource, but an important resource. What about them? Let's be honest with each other. You think that, for instance, there's this long typewritten manuscript that they found, or what Shariar is bringing out soon.
It was handwritten one more time.
Well, part of it was handwritten, but the longest part of it... Huh? Yeah, I think that's the name of it.
It was handwritten one more time.
Not the whole manuscript, just a part of it. And that they identified with the end of the one that's typewritten. The typewritten is longer.
Was it in Baba's handwriting?
We got a bet on this one, you say.
God's hand was handwritten.
Right.
In Baba's handwriting?
But this new one,
But this new one,
it's
I'm just hearing about it.
You're just hearing about it. Well, let's lay the bit on the record because it's an important manuscript and a lot of work's gone into
What
it.
year does it come from?
Well, if I remember from our Lord Parks, it seemed pretty obvious that that also comes in back from the Prem Ashram period and is part of apparently the literature that Baba was writing up either at that time or specifically for use with the Prem Ashram.
And at least
So it's
part
pretty
of
old.
it is in his handwriting. At least part.
Well, now this is where Little Bear and I just had a bet. He says all of it was found in Baba's handwriting.
No, that's not what I said.
No? All right, then
It
you
was-
correct me.
It was a handwritten manuscript when they found it. Infinite Intelligence that Cherry is about to publish, when they found it, it was in the handwritten format, but not Mayor Baba's handwriting. Because remember, Marijuana showed it to us. Marijuana showed us the boxes full of it with those two books in Eric's room when we were in India last
Well,
year.
now this is typical, I guess, of what can happen to your memory at a certain age, and maybe even before. But I had it placed in my mind that there was a chunk, a fairly important chunk, found in a handwritten document, not necessarily in Baba's handwriting, and that then was found to correspond to a longer document which was typed up, and they even gave the name of the lady who typed it up.
Yeah, because we recorded the whole conversation with Marijuana, you remember?
Oh, I'm sure we recorded it with Marijuana. I remember recording it, yeah.
Should I tell you what I remember?
Sure, please.
The book, In God's Hand, was written in Mayor Baba's handwriting.
Right.
Those pages that are in God's Hand correspond to the handwritten manuscript that they found written by somebody else. Those same pages are in the book that has all the material that's going to be in Infinite Intelligence.
Yeah.
So there's a link there
To Baba.
to Baba.
Yeah.
Besides that, we asked, I butted into the conversation because I'm from New York. I said to Meherwan,
You be careful what you say about New York. You get us both in Dutch.
and I said, Meherwan, in the manuscript that you're going to publish as Infinite Intelligence, does the name Meher Baba appear anywhere? And he said, no. And I said, so besides that link, is there anything that, expresses that it's Baba? And he says, he uses the word I. That's all. And, the style is obviously only Baba talks like this. So they're publishing it as if it's from Meher Baba.
What are the circumstances of its discovery?
Well, that's where satchels and misplaced things come in.
It's
There was a
another shell
whodunit.
game. It's another shell game. Unbelievable
But
shell
what
game.
he's
We
just
have it all on
said,
tape.
yes, this is what I remember. Yeah.
They discovered it in Avanagar in an archive somewhere?
Oh, out at Marizot, as I
Marizot.
remember. Yeah.
Shortly after Baba was buried.
But-
You said shell, and you let you the impression something you shady being
Not shady. It's almost, if you hear what Don remembers, what Eric remembers, what Meherwan remembers, and what other people remember, it's almost as if Meher, can I say all this?
Go ahead.
It's almost as if Meher Baba intentionally confused everybody, including Eric, who was confused after the whole thing. Because even Eric didn't know the whereabouts of that missing book, which used to be in his room.
Now, if I understand, now you're getting into the book.
But it's all connected because everybody's confused about what's going on. It's all connected.
Well, this is the first time I've heard anybody try to connect this into the book.
No, you talked about it with Meherwan in India. You
Not in
both
that
recollected
context.
all. Yes, you did.
In the
Don, believe me.
then I'm going to be upset with Don.
Because you talked to Meherwan about your conversation with Erich about after Baba passed away, and you said to Erich, "Aren't you going to publish Baba's missing book now?"
Oh, sure, that story's clear.
And then
I'll
it's
repeat it
all
because-
connected to this Infinite Intelligence book.
Yeah, could we put whether that is the same thing as the Infinite Intelligence book, because I want to tell what I saw that was all in Baba's handwriting in Erish's cabin.
I'm not saying that it's the same book. I'm saying that there's so much confusion around it. Some people say it is Meher Baba's missing book. Some people say it's not his missing book. And it's just like, very confusing.
You'll never know for sure. You'll never know for sure. You'll never know for sure whether it's Bob or not.
That's why Don's here, so I don't have to answer
But
that.
this is Barbara said you never sent another PS. we will get this book, missing book, or we're talking about another book?
Right.
Talking about another book,
All I'm saying is if you heard Don explain his history with this missing book, and Meherwan explain what he knew, and what he heard from Erich, and what Erich and Don's conversation was, and how Ramju comes into it, and Listom, and this one, and a locked box, and Elizabeth Patterson holding the key to the box. It's unbelievable what goes on.
I'm going to tell you what part of that story I know from my experience with Bob and Erich. Can I bust in?
At least we'll clarify this much.
At least you will hear what I saw. Okay. When we had gotten through, this is a whodunit story. When Ivy Deuce and Don had gotten done editing, we met the 6 weeks deadline, by the way. Yeah. So when we'd gotten done editing it, and it actually then was published by Dodd Mead, we were feeling very, very proud of ourselves, to be perfectly honest. There were a few people who came back and said there are too many capital letters. It's still very difficult to read, a few sour grapes tossed in, but we were still feeling awfully good. So the next time that I was going to go through India and knew I'd get to see Baba, Ivy said to me, "Now, Don, now that we've finished off God's speech, and Baba says that he is very pleased with the work that we have done, I think it's time for us to suggest to him that he let us edit the book." Well, I just have to be honest with you on this one. That suggestion just hit me like lead in the bottom of my stomach. So,
Don, I know there are a couple of people in the room who don't know the history of the book. Could you just give a snapshot of that before you go on?
Well, if you ever get around Meherabad and somewhere over near not too far from the Pilgrim Center, you'll see a sort of an open, sheltered concrete with a funny little thing that looks like a chicken coop in it. And it's on 4 little stilted legs, and in that, the tradition is Mayor Baba spent a lot of time in seclusion writing. And he called this the book, my book. And he would not let anybody read it. It was kept completely out of sight. According to all traditions, the only person who ever got a look at it was Mahatma Gandhi on the boat going to London. And so, of course, what Mahatma Gandhi did to deserve that, heaven knows. But anyway, he did.
Who asked you to edit it again?
This was Ivy Deuce, who asked me to ask Baba if he would now, since we had completed God Speaks Successful, could we now edit the book? The book. You got that straight, Jack? You look a little nonplussed, too. I was totally flummoxed by that one, but I didn't dare show it. So at any rate, I go to India, and as soon as I land at Meherazad, I remember Ivy's request to me, and I know I've got to face up to it. And I'm just wondering, what under the sun is Bob going to think about this? It was the most unappetizing assignment I ever had in my life. So, here we go. And it's the very first day of my very first arrival, and almost every time Baba would come to Mandalay Hall, and I would be sitting in Erish's shack, and then Erich would say, well, Baba's in this hall, he's asking for us to come in. But on this particular occasion, this was the only time that it happened differently at Meherazad. When I got there, I sat in Erish's shack waiting and expecting that Baba would come to Mandalay Hall. Instead, he slips around the corner and comes in Erish's door, his shack. Erich didn't look surprised about it, but I was completely surprised. And so we sit there talking and talking.
Just you,
Erich and Baba. So finally, I said to myself, well, I better screw up my courage and get this out of the way. to have it done, because otherwise it's going to ruin my whole stay with Baba, just thinking about it. Ivy, forgive me, but I did feel that way. So then I decided I better spring it. So I told Baba that Murshida had asked me specifically to make this suggestion to him. And Baba didn't look surprised at all. And all he did was raise his hand. He didn't point his finger at me. He raised his hand and pointed to a chest on the far side of Erish's little shack there. It sort of looked like a wooden box that sailors would have carried on sailing ships 300 years ago. Not maybe too beaten up, but it was obvious that it was one of Erish's store places for sacred things. So Erish gets the message from Baba, and he goes over and opens up the top. And out of that, he takes a little package bound in manila paper, old, wrapping up boxes paper, and the sort of hemp string, cheap string tied up. And so Baba motions this, and Erish brings it over and puts it in my hands to see it and so on. And I thought, my God, she's going to win. I'm going to have to take this back to her. And Baba says, well, there it is, Don. There it is. But this is not the time for it to appear. Perhaps later. But I held that package in my hands. I sized it up because my mind works that way. Mathematics and all that.
Sizing up, show them how big it was.
Oh, I'm going to. Yeah. When I looked at it and remembered it and so on, it's all been indelibly in my mind. There were, let's say, 2, maybe even 3 sections to what was underneath the manila. There was a larger part on the bottom, which is about the size of what I would call the large size notebook that children use in school. The ones with the spiral binders. I don't know whether there were spiral binders in this, but it was that size of a notebook. And that part couldn't have been more than 2 little notebooks thick. And then on top of that was another hump, much smaller, which came in about this long and about that wide, a smaller type of notebook. And there might have been, let's say, 1.5 inches of that size of note paper. So all of this, of course, we know was in Baba's handwriting. And Baba's handwriting, as you know from In God's Hand, was not little delicate hieroglyphic script at all. Baba had a good, free-flowing hand. And so, I don't know why, but I just sort of made an estimate quickly in my mind as I saw that. Again, the way the mind works. And I figured that probably if this was Baba's handwriting, that I'd seen a few examples, and if it were reduced to, let's say, normal book type, that it would probably represent at very, very, very most 200 pages of book script. So, for instance, a pretty small book, as a matter of fact. So if Bao says that he has in the Nothing and the Everything 10%, Baba says, of what was in the book, it was about 20 pages of book size writing from Baba, dictated by Baba. And this compared, well, Little Bud points out to me very correctly that the Nothing and the Everything has an awful lot of white space in it. It's very generous in its composition formatting. But still, 20 pages of a normal book compared to a book of 400 pages is a pretty small amount of the total.
And that book was being kept in Erish's shack.
That was being kept in Erish's shack. Then, when Baba dropped the body, the first day when I got there, there were almost nobody around yet. So Erish and I had some free time together, and all of a sudden I thought to myself, good heavens, since Baba has gone, now certainly is the time when that must be edited and put out to the public. So I said to Erich, isn't this time now for you to get that out of your box and get it into an editor's hands and get it published? And he said, good Lord, Don, you're right. This is the time, but I don't have it anymore. I said, where is it? And he said, well, it's in a locked bank box in Bombay, and Elizabeth Patterson has the keys to it. And so he said, now, Don, all of the Mondelez are terribly busy, of course, because of Baba's death, dropping the body. And so when you get back, because you'll be going back very quickly now, will you telephone Elizabeth Patterson and give her a personal message from me that I feel it is time for her to get or have taken out of the locked bank box in Bombay Baba's script. So I telephoned Elizabeth Patterson, and Elizabeth said, good heavens, Don, I don't have that book nor the keys. Baba sent somebody to pick it up with a message from him to give him the keys, and so the person took it to wherever Baba told him to take it.
And the person's name?
Well, I didn't have the name. And Elizabeth did not either. But this we checked with Meherwan, and Meherwan said, well, it was traced further to the bank records, and it turned out to be Mr. So-and-so. And then the story got so hairy and wild that I could, maybe you remember what happened next to it.
All I can tell you
I think somebody put it under their pillow, you know, something.
that is part of the story.
That's part of the story.
But we had Martin and Christine Cook with us at Marizad with a film camera and a professional microphone, videotaping Don's conversation with Meherwan. So all the names that are missing and there, and the whole story is on video in digital format. So we have all that.
We did some pretty good researching a year ago.
Well, one of our upcoming projects is to actually type it all up as a story. It is a mystery novel. It's a mystery.
It's a dealer.
The thing that's so amazing about it is apparently the shell game, Harvey, forgive me, was orchestrated by Meher Baba, so that even Erich was totally confused at the end of it. And how can you confuse Erich? He knew everything that was going on. And it's just astounding.
It is.
How did Val get that 10% then for the nothing and everything?
Well, he got it from Baba. You know, he's night watchman around Baba. And so, but the thing is, I saw the size of the total script, and 10% of that total script was a tiny percentage of the nothing and the everything. And he does not know he did not have Baba's notes anymore. They were lost.
Yeah. If I could just respond.
Go ahead.
My understanding, because I read the nothing and the everything, was that you have? Val says in the book that Baba dictated to him during Night Watch and said, these points that I'm giving you now are 10% of what I wrote in my original book that I wrote.
Of course, that has to be a pretty small percentage of the total book. But Val cannot say, you know, he no longer has the notes, so we don't know what words came from Baba originally dictated and so on. It's just a great mystery.
Val himself did not actually see those parts of the book. It was all through Baba's dictation.
Oh, yes, it was only Baba's dictation. Baba's statement, this is 10% of the book.
So where did this new manuscript come from then? If the last actual placement of the physical manuscript was that vault in Bombay.
You know what? I just have to admit to you, I don't care. I'm not interested in it. To me, it is, Baba was not absent-minded. He knew what he wanted. He knew what was where. He didn't get forgetful and so on, and forget valuable material that he intended. He Baba did things like this. He would deliberately sidetrack material which had been superseded. So as far as I'm concerned, this manuscript was superseded. And what I read of it convinced me of that. The discourses in God Speaks are, you know, a much more, what should I say, fully developed styling than what's in the book that I read. I didn't read the whole thing. Jack?
We have B and C left, by the way.
Are you taking up the pillar function here? You better,
Finding the pillar about the,
B and
I
C,
surrender.
B and C.
Gwen
B and
had
C.
a question.
Oh, yes,
Gwendolyn.
It
Gwendolyn.
was just a little aside, because Val has lost those notes.
He lost the nose.
There's a difference in the print, in the, nothing in the everything, where some is italicized and some is...
As if it were from Baba.
I assume.
And then nothing in the everything? No, you're thinking of Meher Roshani, maybe.
I think I could double check.
Or Meher Sarod.
I think
you
it's
give
the
the
nothing
reference
in the everything.
to the part that came from Bob.
Maybe Avatar of the Age.
And then nothing in the everything?
Manifesting?
Oh, there's one chapter in Avatar of the Age Meher Baba Manifesting where Bao says, this is the only thing that I have as actual quotes from Baba in this book. The rest is my intuitive understanding. And those points are italicized in Avatar of the Age Meher Baba Manifesting, not the nothing in the everything. No.
And what was the story about somebody having put the original manuscript of the book under their pillow?
I don't know if you want to do that now, do you?
Well,
tend to
this was just one of the zany things that started coming up at the end of this whodunit story, and it stuck in my mind. But as far as I was concerned, my conclusion has been for a long time, Baba superseded the book by God Speaks, and he deliberately lost it. And I don't think we have lost anything that Baba intended to be a great pillar and treasure for us.
I remember that, but maybe we could talk about it another time.
You know, I think we're just about at the point. You had a question.
Number 3 to the touch on that.
Appearance of Baba to close mandali.
Observation, the two things, Baba having to go to the total mandali of that late line.
Where's he reading from?
3 under number 2.
3 under number 2, yeah.
The threesome. C3.
C3.
C3. Bond's observation in threesomes of Baba's handling and correction of even the closest mandali in the light lines rather than the Ellison's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. This was one of the most unexpected things that ever happened to me around Baba, because I got used to the fact that Baba had, even among the mandali, favorites who were terribly, terribly close to Baba. Baba obviously loved them, and you might say pampered them in almost every circumstance. But on a couple of occasions, particularly in New York, this happened, when Baba would be staying in a hotel there and not receiving people publicly. He sent for me, and I came into his room, and there was no obvious reason why I was there, because he didn't have a message for me or an assignment for me. I just sat there and wondered why he wanted me to sit there. And then one of his very favored mandali came into the hotel room, and there was another of the mandali who was also there, whom I knew well as well, who had been just translating a little bit of Baba's gestures and small talk with me. I was still wondering why I was there. And then this favorite mandali came in. Baba gave the individual some work to do, and later on came back into the room, reported, and Baba blew up. And I was absolutely astonished to see and hear Baba treat this pet mandali in this particular manner. And then some days later, exactly the same thing happened again. I got summoned to Baba's room, didn't know why I was there, and this mandali came back from another assignment, and again Baba took extreme exception to what had gone on, and really whipped this person up and down until the mandali was almost crying. It was that severe and that unexpected. And so this I took as being, Baba wanted me to see that even with a special close one, he was still working on their samskaric structure right up to this point in their lives. And I think this was intended to show me, Don, even my mandali are human beings, and they have things in their inheritance which are still problematical. So you cannot accept them. For instance, I love Irish next to Baba. And yet Baba was warning me, Don, sometime you will run across a fault or two in Irish, and don't be surprised by it. But don't take it in just because it's Irish, who is a favorite of yours also. This to me was the lesson that I was being taught.
Oh.
It was a terribly important point.
But you're not trying to communicate that it was Erich who he was lashing into?
No, not at all.
Here was it?
This was in the mid-50s.
What about money?
What about Monty? Monty is one of my favorite human beings. She is not.
Oh,
What did you say?
I told her that she's a perfect woman, and she was very, very upset. She said, no, Allah, it's only God is perfect, nobody else.
And that's a true statement. And I had to see Monty in that role finally. And I was absolutely dumbfounded. And then I remembered Baba's giving me this illustration. Even the closest of my mandali, I am still working on their sanskaras. And so if something crops up in your relation with them, do not assume that somewhere or another they are acting perfectly in that you must be bound by it. It's only when it comes from me.
Thanks for the explanation.
Okay. So, shall we do O Parvardigar? You going to read it out? I've got it in my... Have you got it?
No, you've got it.
Yep. Here's my red binder. I saved it because you put it in big type.
Yeah, I did that for you.
Well, I kept it for you. Oh no, that's not it.
There we go.
You can have a comment also on the prayers.
Yeah, we will get into that, I hope, one of these times. Can we do this as Baba himself did it almost every night after being with the modeling, all during the daytime? And at the end, then we would go out the double door facing Mara's garden, formed into a sort of a moon structure, Bob in the center, Erich at one end, and only Erich would read out loud. Off the members, he would read from a paper, O Parvardigar, and Baba would stand in communion with God. It was a beautiful occasion. I love it this way. So please don't repeat it out loud. Let's just let a little bear be Erich for us now.
O Parvardigar, the preserver and protector of all, you are without beginning and without end, non-dual, beyond comparison, and none can measure you. You are without color, without expression, without form, and without attributes. You are unlimited and unfathomable, beyond imagination and conception, eternal and imperishable. You are indivisible, and none can see you but with eyes divine. You always were, you always are, and you always will be. You are everywhere, you are in everything, and you are also beyond everywhere and beyond everything. You are in the firmament and in the depths. You are manifest and unmanifest, on all planes and beyond all planes. You are in the three worlds and also beyond the three worlds. You are imperceptible and independent. You are the Creator, the Lord of lords, the knower of all minds and hearts. You are omnipotent and omnipresent. You are knowledge infinite, power infinite, and bliss infinite. You are the ocean of knowledge, all-knowing, infinitely knowing, the knower of the past, the present, and the future, and you are knowledge itself. You are all-merciful and eternally benevolent. You are the soul of souls, the one with infinite attributes. You are the Trinity of truth, knowledge, and bliss. You are the source of truth, the ocean of love. You are the Ancient One, the highest of the high. You are Prabhu and Parameshwar. You are the Beyond God and the Beyond God also. You are Par Brahma, Allah, Ilahi, Yazdan, Ahura and God the Beloved. You are named Izad, the only one worthy of worship.
Amen. So we all see each other tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.